The house that shouldn't be good New England winter will make you believe in ghosts. Not the sheet-draped kind, but the ones you can't see, whispers in the rafters, figures in your periphery, the sensation of someone breathing just behind you. In the small coastal town of Greyhaven, Maine, those whispers all seemed to point to one place, the Ashford House. It stood on a jagged bluff, the Atlantic chewing endlessly at the rocks beneath, its black slate roof cutting the horizon. Like a blade, most people swore it had been there forever, though no one could remember seeing it before the winter of 1891. One day, there was only wind-scoured emptiness, and the next a sprawling manor of weathered stone, the kind of architecture you'd expect to see in Cornwall, not on the edge of an American fishing town. No ship had brought its timbers. No work crews had been seen. It was simply there. Children dared each other to run up to its iron gates, touch them, and run back before whatever lived inside could see them. Adults pretended it wasn't there at all, and for nearly a decade, that uneasy balance held. Until the Ashfords came back, the first snowfall of December. 1900 was falling when the carriage rolled into town. Its black lacquered sides were wet with sleet, its lanterns glowing dull orange in the gray haze. People stopped mid-step to watch it pass, horses steaming in the cold. The driver, a gaunt man with pale eyes, didn't look left or right. And behind the fogged glass windows, 3 silhouettes sat perfectly still. When the door opened at the house on the bluff, the town caught its first glimpse of them. Eleanor Ashford, tall and severe, with eyes the color of smoked glass. She moved, as if the air itself bent out of her way. Beatrice Ashford, her sister, younger by perhaps a decade, but no less unsettling, with a beauty that looked carved rather than born. She smiled at no one. And a girl, Clara, no more than 17, skin like fresh parchment and a black ribbon tied tight at her throat. She stared at the crowd without blinking, as if committing each face to memory. The family claimed the house had been theirs for generations, that they'd only returned now to restore it after unfortunate business in Europe. The claim was ridiculous. No one in Greyhaven had ever heard of an Ashford before, but it was easier to nod than to challenge them. People in Maine know better than to ask for trouble. In the weeks that followed, something strange settled over Greyhaven. At first it was small, fishermen finding their nets tangled with unfamiliar weeds, the church bell ringing once at midnight without anyone pulling the rope, cats disappearing from porches. But soon the talk turned to missing people. It was Margaret. Finn first, a seamstress who'd gone up to the Ashford House with a parcel of mended clothes and never come home. The constable searched, of course, but came back pale and quiet, saying only that she must have gone visiting relatives inland. 2 weeks later, James Mallory, a shipwright, vanished on his walk home from the tavern. His boot prints in the snow led toward the bluff. They did not come back. By the time the third person disappeared, a child, 7-year-old Daniel Price. The wind in town seemed sharper, more insistent, as though it carried warnings in a language no one wanted to translate. People said the Ashford windows glowed at odd hours, greenish light pulsing like something alive. They said the gulls that perched on its roof never moved, even in the worst storms, their eyes fixed on the town. Some swore they'd heard music from inside, not the kind played on a parlor piano, but long, droning notes that made your teeth ache. The minister preached against superstition, but his wife was seen crossing herself whenever the house came into view. The grocer stopped delivering to the bluff altogether. And still, the carriage came into town every fortnight, its passengers returning with trunks that clinked when carried, as though filled with glass or bones. It was Henry Locke, a fisherman, with more stubbornness than sense, who finally decided to go up there himself. His sister, Ruth, had been missing for 12 days, and he'd heard nothing from the constable but excuses. On the night of December 29th, With snow thick as wool in the air, Henry strapped on his boots, took a lantern, and headed up the path. To the bluff. He was seen by the watchman at the docks, a dark shape against the white, his light bobbing with each step. The watchman swore he saw Henry reach the gates, saw them open without anyone touching them, and saw him walk inside. He was never seen again. But the next morning, in the snow just beyond the gates, there was something else. Not footprints. HANDPRINTS. Pressed deep into the drifts, palms outward, as though someone or something had been pushed down hard and dragged screaming toward the house. And that was when Greyhaven finally stopped pretending the Ashford House wasn't there. The real question was, had it been waiting all along for them to notice? Part 2. The first night inside will reveal exactly what Henry Locke saw after those gates closed, and why some of the townsfolk began to suspect the Ashford family was entirely alive. The first night inside the snow swallowed Henry Locke whole. Each step toward the Ashford house felt heavier than the last, his boots sinking ankle-deep into drifts that seemed eager to claim him. The air had that particular stillness you only hear before a blizzard-thick, pressing silence, as if the world was holding its breath. His lantern flame wavered in the wind, casting frantic shadows along the skeletal trees that lined the path to the bluff. The gates loomed ahead, their iron scrollwork slick with ice, each curl tipped with icicles like jagged teeth. They opened without a sound, without a hand, without a reason. Henry hesitated just long enough to glance over his shoulder at the shrinking lights of Greyhaven below. Then he stepped through. The crunch of snow under his boots stopped the moment he crossed the threshold. It wasn't that the snow was gone. It was that the sound was gone, as if the world on the other side of the gates existed without echoes. The courtyard was larger than it appeared from town, its flagstones slick with frost. Shapes lay beneath the snow-stone statues, half buried, their features smoothed by ice and time. One had the outline of a woman, head tilted back as if in silent scream. Another, Henry's eyes lingered on it too long, was no statuette. All. It was a figure frozen mid-step, its skin pale as bone, its eyes glassy with frost. He told himself it was just a trick of the cold, a trick of his mind. He told himself a lot of things that night. The front doors stood open, spilling a low amber glow onto the snow dot inside. The heat hit him first thick and humid, like stepping into a greenhouse after a winter morning. The scent was wrong for a home, something herbal, metallic, faintly sweet. Not the smell of wood smoke or food, but of dried plants and iron. The entrance hall rose 3 stories, its walls lined with oil portraits of people he did not recognize. Their faces were painted with obsessive detail, so lifelike he expected them to blink. Every set of eyes seemed fixed on him, their gazes following him as he stepped forward. "Mr. Locke?" The voice came from the top of the sweeping staircase. Eleanor Ashford stood there, her hand resting lightly on the polished banister. She was dressed in black from collar to hem, her high-necked gown shimmering faintly in the light. Her gray eyes assessed him with the dispassionate curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. "You've come for your sister." Henry's throat tightened. "Where is she?" "Safe," Eleanor said, starting down the stairs with the unhurried grace of someone certain she was in control. "Warmer than she's been in years. You'll see her soon enough." The deeper he followed her. Into the house, the stranger it became. The air grew warmer still, as though the hearths were stoked far beyond comfort. Shadows moved along the walls that did not match the flicker of the lamp's slow, deliberate shapes that seemed to slide just out of sight when he turned. They passed. Closed doors from behind, which came faint sounds. A soft hum, a steady drip, something that might have been breathing. Beatrice Ashford appeared without warning in the corridor ahead. Emerging from a side door, as if she had simply been waiting, there for them to arrive. She held a silver tray on which sat a single porcelain teacup, steam curling from its surface. "For our guest," she said. Her voice smooth as poured cream. Henry shook his head, but she pressed it toward him. The scent was cloying floral, but with a bitter undercurrent that made his mouth water in the wrong way. "You'll need your strength before you see her," Beatrice murmured. They stopped before a tall set of double doors, carved with an intricate pattern Henry recognized. Only after staring at it, two long intertwined figures, limbs and faces tangled in such a way that it was impossible to tell where one ended and another began. Eleanor pushed them open. The room beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. A fire roared in a black marble hearth, throwing light across. A table set for three, and there, sitting at the far end, was Ruth. At least it looked like Ruth. Her skin was paler than he remembered, almost translucent, and her eyes seemed to reflect the firelight in an unnatural way. She smiled faintly when she saw him, but it was slow, delayed, as if the gesture had to be prompted. "Henry," she said. Her voice was the same and yet not. He rushed toward her, but Eleanor's hand on his shoulder stopped him cold. "She's still adjusting," Eleanor said. "The process takes time." "What process?" Henry demanded, his voice cracking. Neither sister answered. Instead, Clara entered from a side door, the black ribbon still tight around her throat. She carried a small, ornate box, which she set gently on the table before Ruth. "Would you like to show him?" Clara asked softly. Ruth's fingers, too steady, too deliberate, latched the box. Inside, cushioned in black velvet, lay something small and pale, glinting faintly in the F-I-R-E-L-I-G-H-T. Henry leaned closer, and in that moment he realized it wasn't a jewel or an ornament. It was a tooth, a human tooth, and it had his sister's name etched into the enamel in letters so small, so precise, it could not have been done by hand. Before Henry could react, the double doors slammed shut behind him with a force that made the fire gutter. The sister smiled. "You've come just in time," Eleanor said. And from somewhere deep in the house, far below, something began to knock. Not on the doors. From under the floor. The rooms below the knocking came in slow, deliberate beats. 3 taps, then silence. 3 taps, then silence. It wasn't loud, but Henry felt it more than heard it. A vibration in the floorboards that seemed to crawl up through his boots into his bones. Eleanor didn't flinch. Beatrice didn't look away from him, but Clara tilted her head ever so slightly, like a hound catching a familiar scent. "They're calling," she said softly. Henry's jaw tightened. "Who?" Clara's pale lips curved in something that might have been a smile. "You'll see." The sisters moved with unnerving coordination, as if they were parts of the same body. Beatrice took Ruth gently by the arm and guided her from the room, the younger woman's expression oddly placid, eyes fixed straight ahead. Eleanor turned to Henry and gestured toward a narrow side door. "This way." Henry hesitated. "I'm not leaving without Ruth." "You aren't," Eleanor said, her tone flat, patient. "But you'll need to understand before you can help her." There was something in her voice, not kindness, not threat, but inevitability, that made the hair rise on the back of his neck. The side door opened onto a steep, spiraling staircase. The air that drifted up was damp and cool, carrying with it the faint scent of something mineral. And something else. DK. The light dimmed as they descended, the glow of wall-mounted lanterns giving way to a softer, stranger illumination, pale, greenish light that didn't seem to come from any flame. The steps were stone now, worn smooth. In the center, by decades, no, centuries of passage. "Did you build this?" Henry asked, his voice low. "No," Eleanor said without looking back. "It was here before the house, before the town, before the cliff had a name. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a long corridor. The walls weren't stone, not exactly, more like something halfway between rock and bone, their surface mottled and strangely organic. The faint green light seeped from fissures in the walls, as though the structure itself was alive. Every 20 feet, a heavy door broke the expanse. They were made of wood, but reinforced with tarnished metal bands, each with a small circular window at eye-level. From behind the first door came a faint, rhythmic sound, breathing. Slow, deep, impossibly steady. Eleanor stopped at the second door. "Would you like to see?" Henry's gut twisted. No. She opened it anyway. Inside was a narrow room with a single cot. A man young, maybe 20, sat on its edge, hands resting on his knees. His eyes were open but vacant, staring at the wall. His head tilted slightly when Eleanor stepped in, but he didn't speak, didn't blink. Henry's voice was tight. "What's wrong with him?" Eleanor's reply was almost gentle. "Nothing, not anymore." She closed the door. The knocking returned, this time from farther down the hall. Louder now, more urgent. Henry followed Eleanor despite himself, each door they passed revealing some new, terrible sound, scraping nails, wet whispering, something that could only be described as chewing. At the corridor's end, a single massive door waited. Its surface was carved with a pattern Henry had seen before, those same twisting, intertwined figures that had been on the dining room doors upstairs. The knocking stopped the moment. They reached it. Eleanor placed her palm flat against the wood. The green light in the walls pulsed faintly, in time with something beyond the door. "This," she said, "is the heart." Henry felt his mouth go dry. "What's behind it?" "Everything we've learned, everything we've preserved." She glanced at him, and for a moment, the cool precision in her expression shifted. Something hotter, sharper burned there, like a zealot speaking of her God. Without warning, the locks began to turn on their own. One by one, heavy bolts slid back, metal groaning with age. The door eased open, releasing a draft of air so cold and stale it made Henry's eyes water. The chamber beyond was vast and circular, its walls lined floor to ceiling with alcoves. And in each alcove, a shape. Some were clearly human men. Women, children standing upright, eyes closed, their skin pale and waxy. Others were less identifiable, their forms twisted or elongated in ways that made Henry's stomach twist. Each figure was encased in a thin sheen of something translucent, like glass or ice, and faint light pulsed within them, as though something inside still lived. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone table. Upon it lay tools delicate, surgical, but not quite of any design Henry recognized. They seemed older, stranger. Some were bone-handled, others of tarnished brass, etched with symbols that writhed when he looked too long. Eleanor stepped past him, her footsteps soundless. On the floor. "We save them," she said, running her fingers over the nearest alcove. "We keep them from decay, from being forgotten." Henry's voice was little more than a rasp. "You take them. They come to us broken," Eleanor said. "We make them whole. We refine." Something in one of the alcoves moved, just a twitch, but enough to make Henry step back. The pale figure inside shifted its head ever so slightly, and though its eyes remained closed, Henry knew it, was aware of him. A sound broke the stillness, a high, thin cry, muffled but desperate. It came from the far side of the chamber. Henry's pulse spiked. "That's her," he said. Eleanor didn't stop him as he ran toward it, weaving between the alcoves until he reached the source, a smaller chamber branching off the main one, its doorway framed in the same bone-like material as the hall above. Inside, a single figure hung suspended within a tall glass cylinder. It was Ruth. Her hair floated around her face as if she were underwater, her eyes closed, her lips moving faintly as though in prayer. The greenish fluid that filled the cylinder pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Henry slammed his hands against the glass. "Ruth, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were not the same color he remembered. From behind him, Eleanor's voice was calm. "We can give her back to you, but she will never be the same." Henry turned, his fists clenched. "Then I'll take her as she is." Eleanor tilted her head. "You might change your mind when you see what she's become." Before Henry could respond, the green light in the walls flared bright enough to burn, and every figure in every alcove opened. Its eyes, the ones who wake for a heartbeat. There was nothing but silence, dozens of open eyes, staring from the alcoves, catching and reflecting the green light like glass marbles. Then came the sound dot. It was not one sound, but many. A low moan from the left wall. A series of clicking noises from somewhere behind Henry, like a beetle's chitinous legs snapping in sequence. A slow, measured intake of breath from a figure just over his shoulder. The noises layered together, weaving into a single unbearable hum that made the air feel too thick to breathe. Ruth's eyes roamed, alien or fixed on him through the fluid of her glass prison. Her lips still moved in that silent litany, but the syllables were no language he recognized. The hum grew louder. Henry's pulse matched it without his consent, his chest rising and falling in time. His fingers twitched. The thought crept in, slow and treacherous. If they all stepped out of those alcoves now, would I even try to run? Eleanor moved to the center of the chamber, her black gown dragging across the floor like a shadow that had learned to walk. "They are aware of you," she said, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity over the hum. "They recognize what you are, untouched, not yet refined." Henry's throat was dry. "They're alive?" Her smile was small, humorless. "They are preserved, between what they were and what they could be." Beatrice appeared in the doorway behind him, the pale green light turning her skin almost translucent. In her hands, she carried a thin rod of metal, tipped with something like glass that glowed faintly from within. "Their bodies rest," Beatrice said softly, "but the mind remains busy." One of the figures in the nearest alcove pressed its palm flat against the translucent surface, the skin puckering against it like wet paper. Henry could see the faint network of veins beneath, darker than they should be, moving sluggishly. "They want something," he said, not sure if it was a question or a warning. "They want you." Clara's voice whispered. She was standing impossibly close. He hadn't heard her enter. The black ribbon around her throat seemed tighter now. The bow at her nape pulled distraining. She looked up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "They smell you in the air. Your blood. Your heat. The noise you make when you think you're silent." Henry stepped back, but there was nowhere to go without brushing against one of the alcoves. The hum had taken on a rhythm now, an almost musical rise and fall. His skin prickled with the certainty that if he stayed much longer, he'd start to hum along. "I'm taking Ruth," Henry said, forcing the words through his teeth. "You can't stop me." Eleanor regarded him with a stillness that was worse than any threat. "You'll find," she said, "that we do not stop people. We change them." Beatrice moved to the glass cylinder. She tapped the metal rod against. It sighed once, and a faint shiver ran through the liquid. Ruth's eyes closed, and then opened again, wider this time. The pupils dilated so far, they nearly swallowed the irises. "She knows you," Beatrice murmured, "but she knows us more." Ruth's hand lifted within the liquid, pressing against the glass between them. Her fingers curled, beckoning. The humming broke into distinct voices, not words. Not yet, but shapes of sound that pressed against Henry's ears like physical hands. Each voice seemed to come from a different direction, each vying for his attention. He glanced at the alcoves and saw that some of the preserved figures were moving their mouths, slow and deliberate, as if forming syllables in a dream. They want to speak, Clara said beside him, but they need something to bridge the silence. Henry realized, with a twist in his gut, that she meant him. He lunged for Ruth's cylinder, looking for some latch, some release, anything that could get her out. The glass was cold, but not with the cold of ice. It was the cold of something that had never been warmed. Eleanor did not move to stop him. "Do you even know," she asked quietly, "what you'd be freeing?" Henry slammed his fist against the surface. The sound was muffled, swallowed instantly. Ruth's lips moved faster now, the fluid around her bubbling faintly. For one brief, horrifying second, he thought he could hear her voice in his mind words. That made no sense, syllables that seemed to bend around themselves like a Möbius strip. And the moment he heard them, every other voice in the chamber stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Every preserved figure had turned its head toward him, perfectly synchronized, as if connected by a single nerve. Their eyes open, wet, shining, fixed on him without blinking. Then, from the farthest alcove, one of them stepped out. The translucent membrane that had encased it sloughed away in a slow sheet, hitting the floor with a wet slap. The figure. Man once, though his proportions were subtly wrong-straightened to its full height. Its skin was pale, but stretched too tight over the skull, and its mouth hung slightly open, as though it had forgotten how to close. It took one slow, deliberate step toward him. Then another. Beatrice didn't intervene. Eleanor only tilted her head. Clara watched with something like hunger in her eyes. "They wake slowly," Eleanor said. "But once they wake, they do not go back." More figures were emerging now, their movements slow but purposeful, the sound of membrane tearing filling the air in damp whispers. Henry backed toward the doorway, every instinct screaming to run. But the narrow entrance was already blocked. Clara standing in it, head down, fingers tracing the edge of her black ribbon. "You'll have to pass through them," she said softly, as if offering him a choice. "Or you can stay and learn." "What we've learned." Ruth's palm was still against the glass, but her other hand had risen now, and her fingers pressed against her own throat, tapping it lightly, rhythmically. 3 taps, then silence. 3 taps, then silence. The same pattern Henry had heard knocking through the floor above. And just before the first of the awakened reached him, she smiled. The bargain, the first of the awakened, stopped just short of Henry. It was close enough that he could smell it, not rot exactly, but something deeper, older, like the scent of a cellar that had been sealed for centuries. Its eyes were milky, yet somehow still aware, and they studied him with a concentration that made his skin prickle. It tilted its head, slow as the turning of a clock's hand. Then it inhaled, a long, deliberate breath, as if it were tasting him. Behind it, the others advanced in silent unison, peeling themselves from their alcoves. Each step they took left faint, wet impressions on the floor. The green light in the chamber pulsed faster, as though excited by their movement. Henry's back was pressed against the cold cylinder holding Ruth. Her hand had not moved. Her eyes had not left his. "Why are you showing me this?" Henry demanded, forcing his voice not to shake. Eleanor's expression didn't change. "Because you came here for something you love. That makes you negotiable." "Negotiable?" His eyes flicked toward the shambling figures, then back to her. "You mean bait?" "No," she said, with a faint shake of her head. "We don't trap people here. We transform them." "There's a difference." Beatrice stepped forward, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "You think we're thieves, Henry, that we steal wives, sisters, sons. But you don't understand. Every person we keep for a reason. And every one of them has something to give back." What did Ruth have to give? He spat. Clara's voice answered from the doorway. Her voice. Henry turned sharply toward her. Her voice? Clara's pale eyes didn't blink. Some voices do more than speak. They open doors. She's not opening anything for you, Henry said, his voice tightening. Eleanor's gaze softened in a way that was somehow more dangerous than anger. She already has, Mr. Locke. That's why you heard the knocking above. The figures had stopped advancing, forming a loose half-circle around him. Not touching, not attacking, just watching, as though waiting for permission. Here's your bargain, Eleanor said. We will let you take her from here. But in return, you must leave something of yourself behind. Henry's mind churned. You mean my life? No, Beatrice said. Something more useful. From the folds of her gown, she withdrew a small, black lacquered box. She opened it to reveal an array of delicate metal tools, tweezers, hooked instruments, slender blades all gleaming in the strange green light. We have no interest in your death. We want your capacity. My what? Eleanor stepped closer. Your mind, Henry. You have a way of seeing the world that's unaltered, unshaped by the work we've done here. That perspective is valuable. You want to carve up my brain, Henry said flatly. To share it, Beatrice corrected. To refine others with it. And in return, you take Ruth home, breathing and whole. Henry's pulse hammered in his ears. It was an impossible choice, and they knew it. Every second he hesitated, the green light seemed to pulse brighter, the air thicker. He glanced at Ruth again. Her expression hadn't changed, but her fingers tapped her throat once more 3 times, then stillness. 3 times, then stillness. Was it a warning? Or was she telling him to agree? What happens to me if I agree? He asked slowly. Beatrice's lips curved faintly. You remain Henry Locke. You walk out those gates tonight. But there will be absences. Thoughts you once had will be gone. Memories may blur. You'll forget the way certain colors make you feel. You'll lose the taste of certain truths. And if I refuse? Clara's voice was almost tender. Then Ruth stays, and you stay, until we find a use for you. The awakened shifted, their feet whispering on the damp stone. The message was clear. If he refused, the choice would be made for him. The air between him and Eleanor seemed to tighten, the way a rope strains before it snaps. Henry thought of Ruth as she'd been laughing in the kitchen of their childhood home, her hair tied back, her hands dusted with flour. He thought of the girl in the glass, lips moving in an alien rhythm, and he thought of leaving here without her, knowing she was somewhere below, preserved and used. Finally, he said, You swear she goes free? Unharmed? Eleanor's smile was small but precise. I swear she will walk out alive. And me? You will walk out, changed. He took a breath that felt like it scraped his lungs. Do it. Beatrice's smile widened. She set the lacquered box on the stone table in the center of the room and selected a thin, curved blade that glinted sharply in the pale light. Sit, she said, gesturing to a low, high-backed chair that looked more like a restraint than furniture. Henry's knees felt like they might give way, but he forced himself forward. The awakened watched him pass, their heads tilting in eerie synchronicity, their breathing never faltering dot as he sat, straps closed around his wrists and ankles, not pulled tight, but firm enough to tell him there would be no changing his mind. Beatrice stood behind him. He felt the cool touch of her fingers at the base of his skull. Eleanor moved to Ruth's cylinder, resting her hand on the glass. When I give the word, Eleanor said, she will be released. Henry heard the faint chime of metal tools being set into place. Then the cold press of the blade's tip against his scalp. Clara stepped closer, her shadow falling over him. She leaned down so only he could hear. When it's over, she whispered, You may not remember this was your choice." And with that, the first incision was made. The departure, the first touch of the blade, was almost delicate, like the trace of an insect's leg across the skin. But the sensation changed quickly, shifting into something deep and wrong, a pressure that wasn't quite pain but still made. Henry's stomach lurched. His fingers twitched against the restraints as Beatrice worked, her movements precise and methodical. The green light in the chamber pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, as though the room itself was watching. The awakened stood in their silent semicircle, heads slightly bowed, as if in reverence to the procedure. Through the haze, Henry's eyes locked on Ruth. She was still in the glass cylinder, her palm flat against the surface, eyes unblinking. He tried to focus on her face, to anchor himself, but every few seconds, her features seemed to shift. Subtle distortions, her mouth a little wider, her eyes just a shade too large, like his mind couldn't quite remember what she was supposed to look like. Beatrice spoke softly behind him, not to Henry, but to Eleanor. "The threads are intact. He's kept them orderly." "Good," Eleanor replied. "We'll take only what we need." Henry wanted to ask what they needed, but his tongue felt heavy, his thoughts sluggish. It was as if someone had opened drawers in his mind and begun sifting through them, discarding some contents, setting others aside. He saw flashes his father's hands getting fish on the dock, the smell of pine sap in summer, the first time he'd seen Ruth smile after their mother died, each image flickering before vanishing into darkness. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Beatrice stepped away, her hands gloved and gleaming with something clear. "It's done," she said. Her tone almost warmed. Eleanor touched the cylinder's surface. The green fluid began to drain away, leaving Ruth suspended for a moment before she staggered forward into Eleanor's arms. Her skin was damp and cold, her movements stiff, but she was breathing. Henry's restraints released with a quiet click. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying. The world felt wrong. Not just the air or the light, but his own mind. Certain words didn't come as quickly. Certain memories had holes smooth and round, as if someone had scooped them clean. "Take her," Eleanor said, guiding Ruth toward him. "And go before you change your mind." Henry caught Ruth by the shoulders. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, something flickered there, recognition, gratitude, and something else. Something darker. He awakened, parted silently, creating a path to the door. As Henry led Ruth through them, he felt their gazes on him, cool and constant, like water flowing over stone. Clara lingered at the edge of the path, her fingers resting lightly on her black ribbon. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. "You'll be back." The climb from the chambers below to the surface was longer than Henry remembered the descent. The air grew colder, the damp scent fading into the dry chill of winter. When they stepped into the entrance hall, the portraits on the walls seemed to lean closer, their painted faces sharper somehow, their expressions more knowing. Outside, the snow had stopped. The gates stood open, revealing the pale expanse of the bluff and the town's distant lights. Henry half-carried Ruth down the path, his boots crunching in the silence. The wind was sharper out here, and it made her hair whip across her face. She didn't brush it away. She didn't speak at all. It was only when they reached the edge of town that Henry realized he had no memory of what day it was, or even what month. He remembered snow when he arrived, and snow now, but the space between was gone, scrubbed clean. The first person to see them was the dock watchman. His face went pale when he saw Ruth, as if she were something dredged up from the bottom of the harbor. You both been gone," he stammered. "Weeks." Henry didn't answer. He didn't want to think about what that meant. They returned to the small house Ruth had once shared with him. It looked the same, but it felt different, like stepping into a place or someone had rearranged the furniture just slightly enough to make you doubt your own memory. Ruth moved through the room slowly, touching objects without seeming to recognize them. That first night, Henry woke to the sound of her voice. She was in the kitchen, speaking in that same strange language she'd mouthed in the glass. The sound was soft, almost tender, but it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. When she realized he was standing in the doorway, she stopped abruptly. "I was just remembering," she said. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. The days passed. Henry began to notice changes, small at first. Ruth no longer blinked as often as she used to. She'd sit for hours without moving, staring at nothing, her lips barely parting as if silently counting. Sometimes when she did speak, she'd start in English, but end in that other tongue, her voice growing lower, slower. And Henry noticed changes in himself, too. He couldn't remember the names of certain fish he'd known since boyhood. The harbor tides were harder to read. Once he stood on the dock and realized he couldn't recall the exact color of his mother's eyes. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ruth reached over and took his hand. Her grip was cold, but steady. "They'll need you again," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, "when they're ready for the rest." Henry stared at her, but she only smiled faintly, an expression that was both hers and not hers at all. From somewhere far out beyond the bluff, carried faintly on the winter wind, came a sound he knew too well. 3 taps. Silence. 3 taps. Silence. The Ashford House never sent for him. It didn't have to. Some nights, Henry would wake standing at the edge of his property, boots already wet with frost, facing the path that led up to the bluff. And though he'd turned back before reaching the gates, he knew the day would come when he wouldn't, because part of him was still there, and the part they'd left behind was calling the rest home.